A little bit of, I added this last night. This is a slide where I was doing exactly what Tiago was doing on a much smaller scale. That is me in college, and that is Guy Kawasaki. I don't know if you know him, but he basically was one of the first VCs in the Valley. He's kind of changed his approach to doing business right now. He goes on book tours now, and he's more, sort of more of a family guy, not as focused on the VC world. But he came to speak, and that's one of the experiences that will come back later, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, ponies. So when I was 8 years old, I think that most little girls, when they're 8, ask for ponies. I asked for a domain name, and yes, that was the domain name. So I had a conversation last night with some folks, and they were saying, like, so what's like a hidden talent, or what's like something underground that, that people don't know about you? And I don't know how many of you guys know about river dance and like Board of the Dance, where people get really aggressive on stage and dance. That is what I did when I was 8 years old, and that's why I got Spicy Irish, the domain name. I also got GeoCities hosting when I was 8 years old, and I've been coding and designing ever since. And that was just one of the first steps toward where I am today. I think that when I was 8, I learned a lot from my mom. So my mom was an entrepreneur during the dot-com boom, and let me tell you, she worked tirelessly. She was somebody who, I fell asleep on her office floor. I remember having a pet turtle, and I had it like falling on the ground in her office. I used to steal the sugar cubes that they had in their, in their coffee making area. And my first job was stuffing brochures for her with phone card information. So she sold international phone cards over the internet and calling cards, right, during the 90s. And what I learned from that experience was that you absolutely cannot work on a business and be a startup entrepreneur unless you are insanely passionate about what you do. I learned by seeing her slave away every single night, and even to this day, she still will text me and be like, hey, so I've got this idea like about blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, I could have taken her up on so many of those opportunities, but I wasn't passionate about any of them enough to actually want to stay up all night long, fly out across the world and talk about those types of things. And so that's where PopTip comes into play. I think that David talked a little bit about this before, but I found out I was super passionate about feedback. Really random. But feedback helps inspire ideas and helps people take action. And the way that I see feedback happening today at massive scale is through social networks. So when I was younger, I thought about this idea of feedback and said, hey, what does feedback really mean? Feedback can mean, hey, I like that idea. Feedback can mean, hey, I had a crappy experience at McDonald's the other day. You should fix it, right? Feedback can just be your opinion about politics or whatever it may be, an ongoing event in the world. Feedback is so much bigger than anybody really realizes. It's the global opinions of the world, and it's the power to actually act on those opinions. So what we do at PopTip is we've created an algorithm that analyzes unstructured conversation data. So when people share their opinion online and they use LOL, and you guys speak in other languages, and there's curse words, there's like, oh my gosh, with 5 Gs, that is unstructured information, and this statistic comes from IBM and Microsoft. And what we've created is an algorithm that understands that. So I've been asked by a ton of people being like, what does PopTip really do? It's really hard to explain what we do, but here's an example. So we work with MasterCard, and essentially they are able to ask questions directly over Twitter and Facebook. And our algorithm analyzes all of the text responses that people reply to that question. So they asked an open-ended question during the Grammys in the United States and said, like, hey, what was your favorite experience? What were you most excited about from the Grammys this year? And people started tweeting back and telling MasterCard what they were most excited about. And what MasterCard was going to do with that information was they were going to take one of those suggestions, take action on it, and actually give the opportunity to a fan the potential to actually meet one of those celebrities or one of those groups that they talked about and they were excited about. So here's an example of our product out in the wild on Twitter. We really believe strongly in native experiences, and so so this would actually show up on Twitter. Another example of what we do, we have another product called Zipline, and essentially what Zipline does, it allows you to analyze, or a business to analyze, a topic of conversation. We say, hey, what is the world saying when WhatsApp got acquired by Facebook? And the world was talking about it. And so what we do is we identify common phrases or commonly held opinions or consensus amongst many people around the world who may not know each other. You guys might have been tweeting about WhatsApp, and maybe my friend was tweeting about WhatsApp, and you guys had no connection to each other, but it was a commonly held opinion. And that is something that's super important for businesses to understand. It's super important for people to understand, hey, should we take action on this information? So I feel like Portuguese people, at least from the audience so far, likes to ask, like, how do you make money? So we make money, we're a SaaS product, software as a service. Companies pay us money every single month. We sign licensing deals, and they're able to essentially use our software. But let's back up a little bit. Oh, those are the companies that pay us money. So yes, our customers are awesome. Let's back up a little bit though. So when we talk about the idea that like you have to be super passionate about what you do, there's this one scenario that I think was probably the absolute best advice that I've ever gotten in my entire life to this date. It was a piece of feedback that I will absolutely never forget. And this was when I was 19 years old, I was in college, and I know that I think somebody yesterday talked about the idea that use being a student to your advantage. Use it to your advantage. I mean, that's an example where, like, Tiago, I know we've used him so much, but I think it's still true. Use being a student to your advantage. So I wrote on Facebook to Joe Mansueto. You may or may not know who Joe Mansueto is, but he started a company called Morningstar Financial. It is one of the first consumer platforms to understand how to invest money. They also sold software as a service to enterprises so that they could actually make decisions about how to invest their money. And he told me this one piece of advice, and I think it actually goes back to Adam's talk yesterday, was that figure out one thing that you're incredibly passionate about, so passionate about that you would stay up all night to deal with this one thing, and build up this like pile of experience, information, and knowledge. A pile that nobody else can replicate. Something kind of like what Adam talked about yesterday, where he had years and years and years of experience about this one area. Nobody can walk in his footsteps and say, this is exactly what he knows, and nobody else can replicate that mound of information. And that's what he did with Morningstar. He said, I came up with all this information about financial institutions, and I said, or investing rather, and this is going to be all the different ways that I can scale my business, and all the different revenue opportunities, and all the different ways that we can change the world with this set of information. So I took that with me, and I thought about all the past experiences that I had in my life. And this moment, actually, I'm sitting next to someone who's actually from Lisbon. And this was an experience in college, and they told me the same thing. Figure out a mantra that you're going to live by. And my mantra was essentially make it happen. And that make it happen was essentially something that I wanted to help companies, help people make ideas happen, make action happen. And the only way that I felt that people could make action happen was through understanding a direct route of feedback. Use that feedback to take action. And so basically, I went on this like crazy sort of extravaganza of, I was at Notre Dame as a student, and I didn't have any way of really breaking out of Notre Dame. I know that you guys may or may not know about what Notre Dame is, but it's in the middle of like podunk nowhere. It's got like the highest crime rate per capita. It's just like, and all they care about is football, and not soccer. I'm talking like football. They all run around with gold helmets. It's a really great university, but it's definitely not an entrepreneurial culture. So I said, okay, I want to get a job in New York City, and the reason for that is because I feel like there's a lot of different types of people in New York City. And I need to get there. My parents are never going to give me money. My parents never gave me money for anything. So I saved up, and I essentially bought a plane ticket to go work for a company called Saks Fifth Avenue in New York City. And I wanted a job that only allowed me to work 40 hours a week because I wanted to do other things after hours, essentially. but I needed money to sort of like bootstrap my way into making friends in New York. So every single morning I would wake up at 5 a.m. and then I'd go to McDonald's because they had free Wi-Fi. It was a block away from my office and they had the cheapest breakfast. So I did that. At the same time, I think that a few of the people who have been with me started to see that instead of drinking coffee because it was so expensive, I started taking these like caffeine pills instead because that's how on a budget I was. I could buy like maybe 40 days worth of coffee for $7.99. So I started doing things like that. And I think that the key element there was determination. And when I got to New York City, I took this class and someone told me, and I had this actual same experience coming to Lisbon and seeing I think it's our startup Lisboa. When I went there, someone said to me, hey, like, you don't know anybody in New York, do you? And I said, no, I don't. And they took me to all of these different startup buildings around the city. And you're walking into this door, and you go in, and you're going up this elevator. It's sort of a crappy entrance. It's sort of an old building. Press the button, get up there. This was Friday at 6 p.m. I don't know what time it is in your guys' time. But in any case, we get up there, and there's just people frantically coding. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? He's like, yeah, you want to go to another spot? I'm sure. Go to the other spot. And I get there, and people are frantically coding. And I was just like, holy crap, I have been at Notre Dame doing I don't even know what I've been doing. I better get my ass up and start doing stuff. And so this slide taught me, I think that the thing that I put this on here for is because when I was in high school, there was this one newspaper article on the wall, and it was about these football players. And somebody asked this football player, like, hey, what makes you different from everybody else? And he said, the difference between me and someone else is that I will outwork you. And that one quote stuck with me for the rest of my life. I will outwork you, and what you don't do today, somebody else will. And so I started working frantically in one of these startup ecosystem type places, similar to Startup Lisboa, and I started giving away my design skills for free. So I just started just doing whatever it possibly took. And I actually, somebody who went to Josh's college was there, and I designed a landing page for them, and I stayed up till 6 a.m. working on this landing page and still had to go to work the next day. And he never even used the landing page, ever, okay? But the one thing that did happen is that he saw me working really, really hard, and he saw that I was a good person and that I could get it, and he introduced me to my current investors. Somebody named David Tisch, who actually became the managing director of an incubator called Techstars. So he introduced me to David Tisch and to one of my investors. And that entire introduction, that whole thing, I mean, it was probably worth $1 million just for that one night. And I'm serious. Did I know that going into it? No. And I think that that's where, when you think about relationships, you cannot sever relationships. You have to build relationships because people are the conduits through which you can move forward. When I started working with David Tisch, he said, hey, I've got this incubator and I've got this accelerator. Maybe you should apply to Techstars. And one of the things that I think, so we got in. So you guys can ask questions about that if you want. But one thing that I wish I had done differently at Techstars was that getting into the program, I know that people say don't make decks, don't make decks, go build product. But I actually wish I would have made a deck that said, this is what I want to accomplish by this date. Put all the logos on the slides of who you want to sell to. Put the numbers of how many users you want within a year or within 3 months or whatever it might be. Put the people you want to hire. Maybe you don't know them, but you know the role and the cool stuff that you're going to put on that slide, and then work backwards. How are you going to get to the point where you can actually legitimately tell that story? And so that's what I think that I wish I would have done differently. The next piece of information that I got, getting back to Guy Kawasaki, is I wrote him an email, super embarrassing email, by the way. It's super long, don't ever send an email like this. But what I said was, I was like, hey, you want to provide me some feedback? And then he said, here, entrepreneurs like to show activity. These are all means to a goal. Investors want to see milestones toward the goal. And one of the best lessons additionally that I learned was that activity is not the same as results. It's not. So when you go and you're like coding all day, saying I've got 1,000 lines of code, or I've got 5 repositories worth of information, or whatever it might be, who gives a fuck? Like, if you don't have a product out there, and you don't have users, and you don't have traction, or maybe you don't have a launch date, whatever it might be, activity is not the same as results. So don't get bogged down with the activity on the day-to-day. And I think that with that in mind, underestimating prioritization can be super detrimental. And so one thing that, especially in our space, we're dealing with social media. There's so many startups in social. It's like social networks and social analytics and all these other things. And what we found was that instead of trying to compete with all of those other groups, we looked at a way to change the game. And so one of those things was when people say to me, hey, do you guys do like sentiment analysis, which is positive or negative association with a word or a topic? I'm like, no, we do phrase analysis. And this is why it's so much harder to do this, this, and this. And I think that that's something that, getting back to yesterday's talk with Adam, don't just replicate things that are already there. Don't say we've got to have these table stakes because everyone else does. When Josh showed that idea of like, you didn't really log in, you just, you clicked a button and then they like hand did it. That's the kind of thing that I think he was able to focus on other areas instead of replicating stuff that already existed. This graph is also from Albert Wenger, and I think it's awesome. So it's not about working longer. When I think about like, how do I outwork you? It's about working smarter and thinking about, hey, how much effort can I put in and what's the benefit of that effort? Is it better for me to put in this amount of time and get this? Or should I go build login and get this and get, and maybe have a feature that's parity to something else? So that's another thing that I try to keep in mind. And then the last thing was, and I'm going over, so you can kick me off at any point, but do what you say you're going to do. Fred Wilson has an incredible blog post, and he's like, I'm telling you, half the people I meet don't ever even do what they say they're going to do. So if you're that one person that says, listen, it might be conservative, but this is what we're going to do, then deliver on that deliverable. Do what you say you're going to do. And I think that that gets back to the relationships topic again as well, which says those people are going to remember when you backed out of your promise. They're going to remember when you show up, and they were not expecting to hear from you ever again, but you show up with that one thing being like, yeah, I fucking did it. So that is the kind of thing that I think is so important. But all throughout this time frame, I think that these are some of the guiding principles of what I was working towards. In the beginning, it was all about being relentless. Relentless to the point where my coworkers thought I was crazy. They were like, you go to McDonald's every morning, isn't that disgusting? No, I had to get stuff done. Overcome rejection. So, I think that that was something I didn't really talk about that much, but it was, again, the Guy Kawasaki moment where he's like, you're an idiot. Don't do that. Be empathetic. So, thinking about the idea that you have to resonate with those users and build something they really want. And then thinking and acting sustainably gets down to the prioritize and focus. It is unsustainable to build lots of things that are frivolous. It's unsustainable to spend tons of money. Be frugal. Figure out how you can make it work with what you have, with your limited means, your limited team, your limited amount of money. And then prioritize and just focus on that one result that you want to get. I had another slide in here that was equally as weird, but all this stuff that we did today, that's what happens every day in my office. So thank you so much.